Honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise tonight with regard to the Comprehensive and Economic and Trade Agreement with the European Union, or CETA. Specifically, I would like to follow up on a question I asked in the House following a leaked Health Canada report that suggested that the government may consent to provisions in the CETA that will raise the price of prescription drugs in Canada. I would first like to reiterate the position of the official opposition New Democrats that we want to encourage trade with Europe. We see in Europe and the European Union an excellent trading partner comprised of many wonderful jurisdictions. Europe is comprised of mature democracies with mature and progressive economies. In many sectors, our industries are complementary, which means that there are great opportunities for Canadian exporters to tap into the massive European market. However, Mr. Speaker, the CETA is also raising concerns among Canadians, both because of what they fear is in it and due to the secretive and non-transparent manner in which it is being negotiated. These two issues are illustrated perfectly in the question at hand involving the leaked study from Health Canada. This report concluded that the changes to intellectual property proposed by the European Union in CETA could raise the cost of medication in this country by $2 billion a year. Mr. Speaker, Canadians have been voicing their concerns about this for years, since first hearing rumours that this government, the Conservatives, are willing to negotiate away access to affordable drugs in order to get a free trade deal with the EU. In addition to the leaked Health Canada documents, there's a reputable study that concludes that the changes may raise costs of drugs in Canada by nearly $3 billion. How has the government responded to these concerns, Mr. Speaker? They have ridiculed them and misled Canadians. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have repeatedly been asked to shed light on what they are seeking in the trade agreement with the EU. In June, government officials have testified that they did not have a mandate to make changes that would raise drug costs. The government then put out a so-called fact sheet calling the idea that CETA would raise drug costs a myth. Now, if there were no mandate to do this, if the government was not seeking to change the intellectual property regime in Canada, why would Health Canada and Industry Canada take it upon themselves to conduct a study this September as to the cost implications of the IP changes and raising prescription drug costs in Canada? In a further example of non-transparency, the government has not released the Health Canada study. Just as with the rest of the CETA, Canadians are left to rely on leaked documents. Mr. Speaker, transparency is critical to democracy. Honesty is critical to democracy. We understand that the actual negotiations must happen behind closed doors to some extent, but that does not mean that you can't have a level of transparency. A government can seek input from Canadians as to what they want out of a trade deal. A government can announce what we'll be seeking. A government can also be upfront about the possible implications and give regular progress updates to Canadians. That's a transparent approach to negotiating trade deals. And this is the approach that New Democrats will take to negotiating trade deals. Because, Mr. Speaker, trade deals are extremely important in all aspects of Canadian society, and New Democrats know that cooperating and consulting with a wide variety of interests will lead to a better deal. Canada should consult with investors, business leaders, labour leaders, municipalities, and stakeholders of all types. There are legal implications, so we need to hear from legal and constitutional experts. In the case at hand, Mr. Speaker, where we are talking about making changes that will raise the cost of drugs, perhaps by billions of dollars a year, we need to consult with those most affected. Businesses pay for drug costs through their employee benefit plans. Provinces are large buyers of prescription medication. Seniors and disabled people, the most vulnerable in our society, are the ones who will bear the brunt of these changes. And yet this government dismisses all of these people and refers to their fears as myths while studying the very issue they're concerned about. Will the government come clean with Canadian people and tell them how much the CETA will cost them? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague from British Columbia for his intervention on this matter. But let me just say at the outset that our government believes that there is simply no better job creator than free and open trade. In fact, Canada's economy proves it. Trade is equivalent to over 60% of our GDP, and 1 in 5 jobs is generated by exports. Our government understands that helping Canadian businesses expand and succeed abroad directly benefits workers and families by creating jobs and prosperity. And this is more important now than ever. These are challenging, uncertain economic times. Our government has an economic plan to meet these challenges, a plan with deeper trade at its core. We see trade as the new stimulus, an opportunity to create new jobs and prosperity for Canadians. Our negotiations with the EU are a cornerstone of our plan. The EU is already Canada's second most important trading partner, with two-way merchandise trade reaching $92.1 billion last year. A successful agreement would give Canadian businesses a serious competitive edge in the single largest market in the world. Tariff elimination would make our exports far more price competitive in the EU market. In fact, a comprehensive agreement with the EU is expected to provide a 20% boost in our bilateral trade and a $12 billion boost to Canada's economy. That's the equivalent of a $1,000 increase to the average Canadian family's income, or 80,000 new jobs. In sector after sector, across the country, Canadians are counting on our government to negotiate an ambitious agreement with the EU, and we're not going to let them down. Mr. Speaker, Canada's economy has thrived with free trade. Millions of jobs have been created since Canada and the United States signed the NAFTA. It has given our businesses and workers the kind of access to the U.S. market that other countries can only dream of. We want to create the same benefits for our workers in the EU market. Despite these facts, the NDP and professional anti-trade activists continue to resurrect the same old, tired arguments. Canadians know the NDP have consistently opposed our government's efforts to open up new markets for Canadian exporters. Now they are even opposing agreements while they are being negotiated. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member should not prejudge the outcome of negotiations. That's what negotiations are all about. Our government has said many times before that our government seeks to strike a balance between promoting innovation and job creation while ensuring that Canadians continue to have access to the affordable drugs that they need. And I can assure you that we continue to consult with stakeholders and provinces and territories. Mr. Speaker, we know that Canadians believe in the greater power of free and open trade and the benefits that result. Thanks to our government's ambitious pro-trade plan, we are well underway to unlocking new jobs and opportunities for Canadians across the country. Thank you very much.
Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, a conservative trade policy that raises drug costs on Canadians from $2 to $3 billion a year is not the kind of trade policy that Canadians want. And I notice my honourable friend did not say a single word to refute that. Mr. Speaker, the government refers to their record on trade with an air of pride. Well, they shouldn't. They talk about the deals they have signed as though they're crossing off a shopping list. But let's look at those deals. Generally, they've been with small economies and in many cases with partners with whom we should not be dealing. Countries like Honduras and Colombia, countries with disturbing track records on human rights and environmental protection. And what about the Conservative record? Well, here's the real numbers, Mr. Speaker. Under the Conservative government, we've gone from a trade surplus of $26 billion in 2006 to a trade deficit of $50 billion today. Our manufacturing trade deficit has exploded 6 times to $90 billion today, and our export of raw or barely processed resources is going up while manufactured items is going down. Mr. Speaker, we would like to see a deal with the EU, who's a good partner and has a large economy, but I think Canadians can be skeptical as to whether or not this will be a benefit to Canada when they have to see their drug costs go up by billions of dollars a year. And I'd like to ask my honourable friend, what does he say to Canadians about drug costs and CETA?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what Canadians should be skeptical about is the NDP's claim, their new conversion to believing in trade, because they haven't supported any free trade agreements, anything that, in fact, they go to Washington to argue against trade. So we have a difficult time believing that. And as I said before, let me just say again that our government will continue to seek a balance between promoting innovation and job creation through trade while ensuring that Canadians continue to have access to the affordable drugs that they need. So let me be clear. Our government will only sign an agreement that is in the best interests of Canadians.